I never thought silence could be this loud. The kind of silence that presses on your chest, squeezing until it feels like you can't breathe. It wasn't the church bells, or the priest's voice, or even the rain that haunted me that day. It was the silence. The silence of my husband's coffin lowering into the ground while the world carried on as if nothing had happened. Black umbrellas moved like shadows, swaying with the wind. Raindrops clung to my eyelashes, blurring the edges of reality until the whole day looked like a faded photograph. My hands trembled so badly I had to clutch the edge of my dress just to hide it. I remember staring at the wood of the casket, polished and cold, and thinking, this couldn't be real. Not him. Not us. And then, in the middle of that storm of grief, my mother leaned closer. Her breath brushed against my ear, sharp as glass. And with a voice only I could hear, she whispered. It should have been you. The words sliced through me faster than the lightning above. For a moment, I thought I had misheard. That maybe the rain had twisted her voice into something cruel. But when I turned to look at her, her lips were still curled, her eyes dry, her face calm. She meant it. My husband was dead, and my mother wished it had been me instead. I froze. My throat closed, my heart hammered so hard I thought everyone could hear it. And yet, no one noticed. Not the priest, not the mourners, not even the relatives standing inches away. They were all busy throwing roses into the grave, while my mother threw knives into my soul. Have you ever been hit so hard with words that your body doesn't know how to react? That was me. I wanted to scream. I wanted to slap her. I wanted to collapse into the mud and let it swallow me whole. But I couldn't do anything. I just stood there, shaking, pretending her words hadn't broken something deep inside me. And in that moment, I started questioning everything. Was she right? Should it have been me? I replayed our last conversation in my head, the argument, the silence, the way I had rolled my eyes at him that morning before he left. Regret twisted its claws into me. Maybe I was the problem. Maybe I was the one who deserved the grave. The rain poured harder, and I let it mask my tears. People hugged me, murmured condolences, told me how strong I was, how beautifully brave. But underneath their words was my mother's whisper, echoing like poison, it should have been you. When the service ended, I couldn't even remember what was said. I only remembered the weight of my mother's eyes on me, judging, condemning. Her hand on my arm felt less like comfort and more like a shackle. On the drive home, her voice played over and over again in my mind until it blurred with the sound of the windshield wipers. I wanted to ask her why. Why she hated me enough to wish me dead. But I was too afraid of the answer. Too afraid it might already be true. Grief has a way of making everything unclear, like walking through fog. But that whisper, her whisper, was sharp enough to cut through it all. It stuck to me like wet clothes, heavy and suffocating. Even in the days that followed, as casseroles were delivered and condolences were texted, it stayed. I could barely sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his coffin lowering and heard her voice again. The world expected me to mourn my husband. But secretly, I was mourning something else too, the realization that my own mother saw me as disposable. That in her eyes, I was worth less than the man I had loved and lost. And the cruelest part? Somewhere deep inside me, a part of me believed her. I remember staring at his wedding band, resting on my palm after they gave it back to me, and whispering into the dark, maybe it should have been me. Maybe she's right. But here's the thing about grief, it isn't just about death. It's about truth. And sometimes the truth doesn't come from the living. Because while my mother whispered her cruelty at the funeral, my husband had left behind something else. Something louder. Something she never expected. And the day I read his will, everything changed. People tell you that when someone dies, you only remember the good things. That grief has this way of airbrushing memories until they shine. But that's not true. When I think of my husband, I remember everything. The laughter, the warmth, the way he held me like I was the only person who had ever existed. But also the arguments that left us both silent for hours. The doubts we buried under routine. The fragile, human cracks in something we both wanted to believe was unbreakable. I can still hear his laugh. It wasn't polished or charming, it was awkward, almost boyish, like a hiccup mixed with a cough. He used to tell me, "Stop making fun of my laugh," but I loved it. It was the kind of sound that filled the room and made walls feel less like walls and more like a home. We had our little rituals. Saturday mornings, he'd always make coffee first, even though he hated the taste, just so I'd wake up to the smell. On rainy nights, we'd sit on the couch, legs tangled, watching reruns of shows we had both memorized line by line. He'd mouth the dialogue with exaggerated faces until I choked on my popcorn laughing. Those moments were ours, tiny, ordinary, sacred. But under all that love lived silence. The kind of silence you don't notice at first because you mistake it for peace. But it grows. It seeps in during arguments that never get resolved, during nights when one of you turns away in bed instead of reaching out. I remember one night vividly. He came home late, again. His shirt smelled faintly of beer and office air. I didn't ask where he'd been. He didn't explain. We just pretended. Pretended that tomorrow would be better. Pretended that the distance wasn't already stretching between us like a bridge ready to collapse. "Are you mad?" he asked once, his voice small, like he already knew the answer. "No," I lied. Because saying yes would have opened the floodgates. And I was too tired to drown. That was our pattern. A fragile dance of half-truths and swallowed frustrations. I used to think love meant avoiding conflict. But now I know, it means surviving it. Sometimes I wonder if he felt the same. If he lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering why the person beside him felt miles away. If he blamed himself, the way I blamed myself. Don't get me wrong, we loved each other. Fiercely. Messily. Imperfectly. Love was never the problem. But love doesn't always cure the cracks. Sometimes it just makes them harder to look at. There were good days, though. Like the time he surprised me with flowers for no reason. Not roses, but sunflowers, my favorite. He held them behind his back, grinning like a schoolboy, and when he handed them over he whispered, "For the girl who makes my life brighter." I laughed, rolled my eyes, told him he was corny. But secretly, I pressed one of those sunflowers in a book. It's still there. Wilted. Fragile. Like us. Other times, his tenderness was so overwhelming I didn't know what to do with it. He would look at me like I was a mystery he'd never solve, a riddle he never wanted to. "You're my forever," he'd whisper when he thought I was asleep. I used to smile in the dark, pretending not to hear. And yet, in between those beautiful moments, there were storms. Arguments that started small, about bills, about laundry, about whose turn it was to cook, but escalated into something heavier. Words like daggers thrown carelessly. Silence that lasted days. One fight I'll never forget. He accused me of not caring about his work stress. I snapped back that he never cared about my feelings at all. We stood in the kitchen, voices sharp, faces flushed, until I finally shouted, "Maybe we're better off apart." The second I said it, I wanted to take it back. His face fell, his shoulders slumped, and he walked out without another word. He came back hours later, and we didn't speak of it again. But the damage was done. I hated myself for saying it. He never brought it up, but I know he remembered. Maybe he carried it like I carried his silence. Love can survive storms, but too many storms can wash away the ground beneath you. Still, I never doubted his love. Even when we were angry. Even when I felt unseen. Deep down, I knew he loved me. I think he knew I loved him too. But love doesn't always look the way movies tell us it should. Sometimes it's messy, cracked, jagged at the edges. Looking back now, I realize how fragile we were. How easy it is to take someone's presence for granted, to assume there will always be another morning, another chance to say the words you swallowed the night before. But the truth is, there isn't always another chance. The night he died, I had rolled my eyes at him. That was the last thing I did before he walked out the door. Rolled my eyes. I didn't kiss him. Didn't tell him I loved him. Didn't even say goodbye properly. I thought I'd have tomorrow. But tomorrow never came. And that's the part that eats at me in the quiet hours of the night. Not the fights, not the silences, but the little things left unsaid. The fragile threads we never tied back together. If you've ever lost someone, you know this. It's not the big moments that haunt you. It's the small ones. The last glance. The last laugh. The last unfinished conversation. I loved him. God, I loved him. But love doesn't always shield you from regret. And now, every time I replay our marriage in my head, it feels like watching a glass vase fall in slow motion. Beautiful. Shiny. Whole for a moment, before shattering into pieces you can never put back together. Some people lose their mother when she dies. I lost mine long before that. If you've ever grown up in the shadow of someone else's approval, you know what I mean. My mother was the kind of woman who believed in perfection, spotless kitchens, perfectly ironed clothes, report cards lined with A's. But the one thing she couldn't iron flat was me. I was always wrinkled in her eyes. Imperfect. Messy. Wrong. When I was 8, I remember standing in the kitchen, flour on my hands, trying to bake her a cake for her birthday. It was crooked, lopsided, and burned at the edges, but I was so proud. I carried it to her with shaking hands, smiling, waiting for her approval like it was oxygen. She looked at it, then at me, and said flatly, "Why didn't you just follow the instructions? You never do things right." She didn't eat a single slice. I laughed it off, pretending it didn't matter. But inside, something cracked. And that crack only widened as the years went by. When I was a teenager, I watched her praise my cousin Emily like she was the daughter she had always wanted. Emily had the perfect posture, the perfect grades, the perfect piano recitals. At every family gathering, my mother would say, "Emily's such a bright young lady. Look at how graceful she is." I'd sit there, shrinking smaller and smaller, wondering if she even noticed I was in the room. Sometimes, I think she didn't. Once, I tried to stand up to her. I told her, "Why don't you ever say you're proud of me?" She didn't even look up from her sewing machine. She just said, "Pride has to be earned." Have you ever felt invisible in your own family? Comment if you have, because that was my life. A daughter who was present in body, absent in spirit. By the time I was 20, I stopped trying to win her approval. I told myself I didn't care. But the truth? Every time she looked at me with those cold, judging eyes, I became a little girl again, holding that lopsided cake, desperate for a bite of love. And then came my wedding. God, if I thought she might soften that day, I was wrong. I remember standing in the dressing room, veil pinned to my hair, hands shaking not from nerves but from hope. I wanted her to come in and say, "You look beautiful." Just once. Just those words. She walked in, glanced at me, and instead said, "Your dress is too tight. People will talk." No smile. No warmth. Just another dagger slipped beneath the fabric of the happiest day of my life. I should have been used to it. But something about hearing that on my wedding day, when I was supposed to feel radiant, carved a wound I still carry. Even my husband noticed. After the ceremony, when the guests were gone and the house was quiet, he held me close and whispered, "She doesn't see you. But I do. Always." I clung to that. Because deep down, I was terrified he might stop seeing me too. The years that followed were no better. Every holiday with her was another reminder of what I lacked. If I cooked, she'd find a flaw. If I decorated, she'd point out what was missing. If I tried to open up, she'd say, "You're too sensitive. Toughen up." It wasn't just criticism. It was dismissal. As if my feelings weren't valid. As if I wasn't valid. I used to lie awake wondering what I had done to make her hate me. Was I too loud as a child? Too needy? Too different from the daughter she wanted? And the worst part? I never got an answer. Just silence. Cold, sharp silence that said more than words ever could. But the cruelty wasn't always subtle. Sometimes, it was sharp enough to bleed. Like on my 25th birthday. I had gathered friends, lit candles, tried to make it a night of joy. She showed up late, looked around, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Well, I hope you don't expect a man to stay if you can't even keep your house clean." Laughter rippled awkwardly from some guests, but I froze. My husband squeezed my hand under the table, whispering, "Ignore her." But how do you ignore your own mother humiliating you in front of everyone you love? That night, after everyone left, I cried in the bathroom while she slept peacefully in the guest room, as if nothing had happened. Her coldness didn't stop at me. When my husband tried to defend me, she turned her venom on him too. She once told him, "You married beneath you. You'll realize that one day." He told me about it, but only later. He didn't want to hurt me. When he finally admitted it, I felt a mix of rage and shame. Rage that she could say something so cruel. Shame that maybe she was right. Because when your mother spends your entire life convincing you you're not enough, eventually, you start believing it. And that's why her whisper at the funeral didn't come out of nowhere. It wasn't a slip of grief. It wasn't shock talking. It was the final, sharpened truth of what she had always felt. That in her eyes, my existence was a mistake. When she leaned into my ear at the graveside and hissed, "It should have been you," it wasn't new. It was a culmination. A confession years in the making. And in that moment, standing over my husband's coffin, I realized something chilling. She hadn't just lost a son-in-law. She had gained the opportunity to finally say what she had always wanted to. That I didn't deserve to live. But here's the part she didn't know, the part that still gives me shivers when I think about it. She wasn't the only one who had something to say. Because my husband's last words weren't spoken at the funeral. They were written. And what he left behind in that will would prove her wrong. The night my world collapsed started like any other. That's the cruelest part about tragedy, it never warns you. It slips in between ordinary hours, cloaked in routine, and rips your life apart when you least expect it. I remember the clock flashing 9:07 p.m. The TV was humming in the background, some sitcom laugh track filling the silence of our living room. I was scrolling absent-mindedly on my phone, half waiting for him to come home. He had said he'd be late, work, again, and I thought nothing of it. That was normal. Then my phone rang. An unknown number. I almost didn't pick up. Do you ever let a call go to voicemail because you assume it's nothing important? I still wonder what would have happened if I had ignored it. Would they have called again? Would the news have hit me differently? But I answered. "Is this Mrs. Taylor?" A man's voice, clipped, professional. "Yes. There's been an accident. Your husband, he's at St. Mary's Hospital. You need to come immediately." For a second, my brain refused to process the words. Accident. Husband. Hospital. It didn't fit together. It didn't make sense. What happened? Is he okay? My voice cracked, rising with panic. Please come as soon as possible. That was all he said before hanging up. The phone slid from my hand. My body felt frozen, but my heart was sprinting, slamming against my ribs. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. My ears buzzed with white noise. Somehow, I grabbed my keys, shoved my feet into shoes, and ran to the car. The world outside looked the same, cars passing, neighbors walking dogs, streetlights flickering. But my world wasn't the same anymore. The drive was a blur. Rain smeared across the windshield, traffic lights bled red into the night, and every second stretched into eternity. My hands shook so violently on the steering wheel I could barely keep control. At one point, I screamed. A raw, guttural sound that burst out of me, filling the car. It didn't even feel like it came from me. It was the sound of a heart breaking mid-beat. Please, 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 I muttered like a mantra. Please let him be okay. Please, God. Please. But with every passing mile, dread grew heavier. A weight pressing on my chest, suffocating me. Have you ever had that gut feeling before you even hear the truth? That instinct that whispers, this is the end? That was me. Deep down, I already knew. The hospital was bright and sterile, buzzing with fluorescent lights that felt cruel in their normalcy. People rushed by in scrubs, voices low and urgent. My legs barely carried me to the front desk. My husband, car accident, St. Mary's called me, I gasped out, words tumbling in chaos. The nurse looked up, her face slipping into that careful neutrality I'll never forget. She made a phone call. Moments later, a doctor appeared, his face grim. Mrs. Taylor? Please, come with me. I followed him down a hallway that seemed endless, my shoes squeaking against the linoleum. The smell hit me, antiseptic, sharp, mingling with something metallic underneath. Blood. We stopped at a door. He hesitated before opening it. That hesitation told me everything. Inside, the room was cold. Machines beeped softly, monitors glowing. And there he was. My husband. But not the way I remembered him. Not the man who made me coffee on Saturdays or mouthed TV lines until I laughed. He was pale, tubes running into his arms, a bandage across his forehead, his chest rising shallowly under the weight of machines keeping him tethered to life. Car accident, the doctor said quietly. Severe internal injuries. We're doing everything we can, but it doesn't look good. The words blurred. My ears roared like the ocean. I stumbled to his bedside, grabbing his hand. It was cold, too cold. I'm here, I whispered desperately. It's me. I'm here. His eyelids fluttered. Just once. Enough for me to believe he heard me. And then, as if my voice wasn't enough, the machines began to scream. Beeps turned into shrill alarms. Nurses rushed in, the doctor barked orders. Hands pressed against his chest, needles pierced his skin. I stood frozen, my back against the wall, watching strangers fight for his life while mine crumbled. Stay with me. I shouted. Please, don't leave me. But he didn't listen. After what felt like a lifetime, the room went quiet. The doctor's shoulders slumped. The flat line on the monitor was steady, merciless. I'm so sorry, he said softly. And just like that, the world ended. I fell to my knees, sobbing so hard my body shook. I grabbed his hand, pressed it to my face, begged him to wake up. We weren't finished, I whispered. We weren't done. You can't go. But he was gone. Have you ever touched someone you love and felt the life slip away, leaving only the shell behind? It's the cruelest feeling in the world. One moment they are everything, and the next, they are nothing but silence. The hours after were a blur. Paperwork. Condolences from strangers in scrubs. A nurse handing me his wedding ring, still warm from his skin. I clutched it like a lifeline, digging it into my palm until it left a mark. Walking out of that hospital felt like leaving part of myself behind. The rain hadn't stopped. The parking lot glistened with puddles. I sat in my car, staring at the empty passenger seat, and realized I would never see him sit there again. I wanted to die. I whispered it into the night. I should have been the one. Not him. Me. And in the days that followed, that thought never left me. My mother's whisper at the funeral only confirmed it, echoing what I already feared deep inside. Maybe it should have been me. Grief isn't just sadness. It's guilt. It's anger. It's waking up at 3 a.m. reaching for someone who isn't there. It's replaying every last word, every last glance, every argument, every silence. And I replayed it all. The eye roll the morning he left. The fight we never resolved. The maybe we're better apart that slipped out months before. Did I curse us? Did my words kill him before the accident did? These thoughts ate me alive. And the worst part? I didn't have anyone to stop them. My mother certainly didn't. Instead, she sharpened them into knives. Her whisper at the funeral wasn't just cruel. It was confirmation of the darkest voice in my own head. And so I started to believe it. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was the one who should have died. But here's the thing about grief. It doesn't come alone. It brings shadows with it. And one of those shadows was about to follow me home. Grief doesn't end with the funeral. That's just the beginning. What no one tells you is that after the flowers wilt, after the casseroles are eaten, after the condolences fade into silence, you're left with nothing but the echo of absence. The house felt wrong without him. It was too quiet. Too clean. Too hollow. Every corner whispered his name, every shadow carried his memory. His shoes by the door, his toothbrush by the sink, his sweater draped over the couch. I couldn't bring myself to move them. I couldn't touch them. It felt like if I disturbed anything, I'd erase the last proof that he existed. At night, I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, listening for sounds that would never come, the jingle of his keys, the creak of floorboards as he walked down the hall, the way he used to sigh before falling asleep. My body still expected him, even when my mind knew he was gone. Friends came at first. They brought food, hugs, words that all blurred into the same dull chorus, "I'm so sorry for your loss." But grief makes people uncomfortable. They don't know what to say after a week. Or 2. Or a month. Slowly, the calls stopped. The visits grew less frequent. Eventually, they stopped coming altogether. I can't even blame them. It's exhausting to sit with someone drowning when you don't know how to swim yourself. But the loneliness? That was unbearable. And then, of course, there was my mother. Her whisper at the funeral became a loop in my head, replaying every time the silence got too loud. "It should have been you." Sometimes I would hear it while making coffee. Sometimes in the middle of folding laundry. Sometimes I'd jolt awake at 3 a.m. with those words echoing in my ears, like she was standing right beside my bed. The cruel thing is, I started to believe her. I replayed every moment of our marriage, dissecting it like evidence at a crime scene. The fights. The silences. The nights I rolled away from him instead of reaching out. The morning of his death, when I rolled my eyes instead of saying "I love you." Was I a bad wife? Did he die not knowing how much I loved him? These thoughts gnawed at me. They didn't just whisper, they screamed. And when you're alone long enough, your own mind becomes your enemy. Insomnia became my closest companion. I'd sit by the window at 4 a.m., staring at the streetlights, the hum of the refrigerator filling the emptiness. Sometimes I'd scroll through old texts from him, reading and rereading words that felt like lifelines. Be safe. Love you. Don't wait up. Other times, I'd scroll through our photos until I couldn't see through my tears. Smiling faces, vacations, holidays, all frozen in time, mocking me with the reminder that those moments were gone forever. Have you ever cried so hard you didn't make a sound? That was me. Silent sobs that left me empty, wrung out, like I had nothing left to give the world. And yet, life outside kept moving. Neighbors cut their lawns. Kids played in the street. Couples held hands at the grocery store. And I hated them for it. Hated that their worlds were intact while mine had shattered. I stopped answering calls. Stopped leaving the house. Stopped caring. At one point, I looked in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. Sunken eyes, hollow cheeks, hair tangled like neglect itself. I whispered, maybe Mom was right. Maybe it should have been me. The thought terrified me, and comforted me all at once. But then something happened. Something small. Something unexpected. One afternoon, while sorting through a stack of papers the lawyer had given me, I found an envelope tucked inside. My husband's handwriting on the front. My name. I froze. My fingers trembled as I traced the letters. It felt like touching him again. Inside, there was a letter. And behind that, a copy of his will. I couldn't bring myself to open it right away. The envelope burned in my hands. Part of me wanted to tear it open, to hear his voice through the words. Another part of me was terrified. What if it was a goodbye letter? What if it was filled with things I didn't want to know? What if it confirmed my worst fear, that I had failed him? I put it away in a drawer. For days, I couldn't look at it. Every time I passed the drawer, my chest tightened. I avoided it like a ghost. But it haunted me anyway. At night, I would dream of him handing me the letter. His lips moving, but I couldn't hear the words. I'd wake up gasping, heart racing, drenched in sweat. The suspense of it nearly broke me. The not knowing. Because here's the truth, sometimes the unknown is scarier than the truth itself. Finally, one night, I couldn't take it anymore. I sat at the kitchen table, the house dark except for the dim glow of the lamp. My hands shook as I held the envelope, staring at my name. Tears blurred my vision. I whispered out loud, as if he could hear me, please don't hate me. Please don't leave me with more regret. And then, with a deep breath, I slid my finger under the flap. The day I opened his will, everything changed. I didn't sleep the night before the meeting with the lawyer. I lay on the couch because the bed felt like a museum of ghosts, counting the slow blink of the living room clock and listening to the refrigerator breathe. The envelope with his handwriting sat on the coffee table, the ink glinting whenever the streetlight slid across the room. If you've ever held a letter from someone you love after they're gone, you know it feels less like paper and more like a live wire. Touch it, and all the rooms in you flicker on at once. I told myself I'd wait for the lawyer. That I shouldn't open anything alone. But grief makes you both reckless and reverent in the same breath. At 5:12 a.m., with the sky still bruised and quiet, I slid my thumb under the seal and unfolded the letter that had my name written like a prayer. Hey, you, it began. 2 words that immediately put his voice in the room. I could hear the soft smile he always used when he said them, the gentle tease in it. If you're reading this, I didn't come home. I hate that these words are how I get to you now, but I need you to have them. I didn't realize I was holding my breath until the second paragraph blurred and I had to blink hard to find him again. I love you, he wrote, plain and unadorned, like a fact that gravity would obey. I love you in the way that wind loves open windows. I love you in the way water remembers the shape of its riverbed. I love you. And I need you to live. The next line was underlined. Live. My throat closed. I reached for his wedding band on its chain around my neck and pressed it to my lips, as if that could steady me in the tide rising inside my chest. He went on. Short lines, like he knew I'd be reading through tears. You think you break things. You don't. You make them true. You think you're hard to love. You're not. You're hard to forget. If I could choose again, I'd choose you. 1,000 times. Even on the hard days. Especially on the hard days. The letter shifted then, gently, then with more spine. There's one more thing, he wrote. About your mother. I know how she talks to you. I know how she has always talked to you. I tried to ignore it, to be polite, but politeness is a poor excuse for letting someone hurt the person you love. So I made choices in the will. Choices I'd make again. Not to be vindictive. To protect you. To say, in writing, what I made you doubt in life, that you are worth being chosen. I set the letter down as if it might bruise. In the quiet that followed, the house felt different, like some pane of glass I'd been pressing my forehead against had vanished and the air was suddenly cold against my skin. He had witnessed it. The erosion. The asides. The way I folded into smaller versions of myself just to fit inside a room with my mother. And he had done something I never asked him to do, he had taken a stand for me when I wouldn't. My chest ached with a new, complicated heat, love, yes, but also shame for every time I'd believed the wrong voice. By 9 o'clock, I'd showered, dressed, and driven to the lawyer's office with the letter in my bag like a lighthouse. The building was old brick with ivy gripping the sides, a row of narrow windows like thoughtful eyes. Inside, the air smelled faintly of lemon oil and paper, serious, quiet, the way you want a place to smell when words will matter. The receptionist's voice was soft. He'll be right with you. I thought I'd be alone for the reading. I thought this would be private, clinical, maybe even anticlimactic. But when the door to the conference room opened, my mother was already seated at the far end of the long oak table, her back arrow straight, a linen handkerchief folded like origami in her lap. She didn't look at me when I walked in. She looked past me, at the window, the way people look at something they mean to ignore. Thank you for coming, the lawyer said, standing. He was middle-aged, tidy beard, kind eyes used to delivering both blessings and storms. Please, have a seat. I sat opposite my mother. The table between us felt like a country border that had seen too many wars. The lawyer cleared his throat. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge how difficult this is. If at any point you need a break. We'll be fine, my mother said, clipped. Her voice carried that cool authority people mistake for grace. Proceed. He nodded, opened a folder, and began. The language was formal, precise, a choreography of hereby and whereas, careful steps through a room full of delicate things. I heard dates, signatures, witnesses. I heard the scaffolding of a life turned into clauses. Then came the parts that weren't scaffolding. To my wife, he read, I leave the house we made ours, with all its contents, except for the items listed in Schedule A. I leave her the accounts in my name, the one with the nickname she teases me about keeping, and the car she insists is too loud when it starts. I leave her the garden I planted with more enthusiasm than skill, and the crooked birdhouse that never did attract any birds. A laugh caught in my throat, small, helpless, like a hiccup. The lawyer smiled with his eyes but kept reading. He didn't linger. He knew lingering would undo me. Most importantly, he continued, I leave her the right to say no. The right to refuse demands that pretend to be duties. I leave her permission to choose quiet. I leave her the freedom to forgive herself for not saving everyone. She saved me enough times. Something in me cracked and reknit at the same time. The words were both a balm and a mirror, showing me the woman he believed I was and the woman grief had blurred. The lawyer's voice softened as he turned the page. There are also letters, he said. Personal. Meant for you. He gestured to a thinner envelope already on the table, my name again. We can pause now, or keep reading, my mother said, the handkerchief in her lap still folded, pristine as a threat. He did. And to my wife, he read, because she will never take enough for herself, I leave the business rights to the small software I built, the one she begged me to sell because she said it deserved a larger life than our garage. Let it have that life. Let it be hers to choose. I swallowed. I had forgotten about the code, the late nights, the small circle of users who sent him emails like confetti whenever he fixed a bug. He had loved it the way a gardener loves a stubborn patch of soil. He had loved me for believing it could bloom elsewhere. The lawyer turned another page. The paper made a sound like a held breath being released. And now, he said carefully, there is the matter of exclusions. My mother's chin lifted almost imperceptibly, a queen anticipating tribute. Per Mr. Taylor's instructions, the lawyer continued, no distributions of any kind are to be made to Mrs. Taylor's mother, here present. This includes monetary gifts, property, or any rights to exert control over the estate. The room shifted. Not physically, the carpet did not tilt, the walls did not bow, but my body told me the ground had changed. My mother didn't blink. The lawyer kept reading, the words suddenly personal, the clauses suddenly human. Mr. Taylor wrote that this clause is not punitive, but protective. He states for the record that he has observed repeated emotional harm directed at his wife by her mother, characterized by manipulation, denigration, and attempts to isolate her from support. He further states that he believes his wife is most vulnerable to such harm during times of grief, and that his intention is to remove any structural avenues by which that harm could be perpetuated. I closed my eyes. Not to hide tears, those had already found their paths, but to steady myself inside the truth of being seen. Someone in the room had named what I had survived without being believed. Someone had notarized the invisible. Additionally, the lawyer went on, Mr. Taylor requests that any items of sentimental value he owned, letters, photographs, the orange mug with the crack, remain with his wife. He explicitly asks that these not be surrendered, to appease anyone's image of propriety. His words. The orange mug. He had insisted coffee tasted better from it, even when the crack made it dribble onto the saucer. I let out a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a sob. Living is full of objects that mean more than they should. Across from me, my mother finally spoke. This is outrageous, she said softly, which was always when she was most dangerous. He had no right to slander me in legal documents. The lawyer's tone held. These are Mr. Taylor's statements, Mrs. She cut him off with a hoarse whisper that hit me exactly where she meant it to. He's not here to defend them. I opened my eyes. Met hers. He didn't have to defend them, I said, my voice surprising me with its steadiness. He lived them. So did I. Something flashlit in her gaze and vanished, the briefest admission, swallowed by pride. You put him up to this, she said. You always did know how to play the victim. It landed like an old bruise, familiar, almost boring in its cruelty. But the letter in my bag burned warmer than her words could ever chill. I did not defend myself. I had new rules now. I had paper to lean on. The lawyer cleared his throat gently. There is one final paragraph of note. He looked at me. Would you like me to read it, or? Please, I said. The word felt like opening a door. He read, if there is any dispute, I instruct that my wife's decisions be considered final. If she needs to sell, she may sell. If she needs to keep, she may keep. If she needs distance, give her distance. Do not call it ungratefulness. Call it survival. She has survived enough. The room went so quiet I could hear the fluorescent lights buzzing like bees. My mother sat very still, then smoothed the handkerchief on her lap with 2 tidy strokes, as if ironing reality might make it obey. Are we quite finished? She asked. For today, the lawyer said. There will be forms to sign, and I'll need your acknowledgement of receipt. She stood, finally glancing at me, her mouth curving into something that might look like a smile to strangers. You always get what you want, she murmured, so low the lawyer wouldn't hear. Let's see what you can keep. She left before I could answer, the door whispering closed behind her like a secret relieved to be kept by wood instead of people. I sat for a long beat, staring at the grain of the table, at the slight nick near my elbow where some other story had caught and left a mark. The lawyer waited with that particular kindness of people who do hard jobs, present, unintrusive. I have copies for you, he said at last, sliding a folder toward me. Anne. I'm sorry about your loss. He wrote these with a lot of care. He wrote everything with care, I said, and that was when the laugh-sob hybrid broke free, tender and humiliating and holy. Even the dumb notes on the fridge. Buy bananas. The green ones scare me less. The lawyer's mouth tugged into a small smile. Then it makes sense he wrote care into this too. I nodded. I didn't try to explain the shift happening inside me because it was too new to name. It wasn't joy. It wasn't relief. It was more like ballast. Like a weight placed in the right part of the boat so the next wave wouldn't flip me so easily. I signed where he showed me. Initialed where he asked. Tucked the folder and the second letter, his second letter, addressed, for later, into my bag. When I stood to leave, my legs felt like they belonged to a person I might someday trust. Outside, the day had brightened in that forgiving way mid-morning can. Cars moved. A woman across the street walked a dog that was pretending to be dignified about the leash. I got into my car and sat with my hands on the wheel, not starting the engine yet, just breathing. I leave you the right to say no, he had written. I said it out loud to the empty car, to the ghost of him in the passenger seat. No, it was astonishing how much the word held when you put it in the center of your mouth and meant it. I drove home the long way, past the park where he'd once made me race him to the bench and let me win, past the corner store where he flirted shamelessly with the cashier when she upgraded his coffee size because I'm trying to be a bigger person. I let memory be a companion instead of a punishment. Back at the house, I set the folder on the kitchen table, next to the bowl with the oranges he'd kept buying because he liked how they looked, even though he always forgot to eat them. I made tea. Not because I wanted tea, but because people in movies who have just learned something life-altering always make tea and I needed to borrow their confidence for a moment. Then I did something I hadn't done since the funeral. I opened the back door and stepped into the yard. The garden was a little wild, his kind of wild, enthusiastic and uneven. The tomato stakes leaned like old men telling stories. The basil had bolted, a feathery crown of flowers announcing it had ambitions beyond pasta. The crooked birdhouse tilted toward the maple like it was sharing gossip. I laughed, soft and wet-eyed, and touched the rough edge of the wood. You stubborn thing, I said, not sure if I meant the house, the herbs, him, or myself. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from my mother, we need to discuss next steps. Call me. I stared at the screen, the 2 sentences as neutral as a courtroom bench. Once, those words would have rearranged my organs. Once, I would have obeyed on reflex. But a new clause existed now, in paper and in me. I didn't reply. Instead, I went back inside and sat at the table with his first letter beside the folder, tracing the lines he had underlined. Live. Right to say no. Not to appease anyone's image of propriety. He had spoken to the exact angles where I shrank. He had left me a blueprint through a maze I thought had no exits. Have you ever felt someone love you in a way that corrects the story you told yourself about yourself? It's disorienting. It's like remembering your real name after wearing a nickname for years. I took a breath and dialed a different number, the lawyer's office. When he answered, I said, "One quick question. If my mother persists, what are my options?" He didn't need an explanation. "You have full discretion," he said. "If necessary, we can formalize boundaries. Written notices. Representation. But you are not required to engage." Not required to engage. I repeated it slowly, tasting each word like bread after fasting. "Thank you." After we hung up, I picked up the second letter, the one marked "for later," and set it back down. Not yet. The first had given me enough oxygen for now. Too much air at once can make you dizzy. I walked through the house then, touching things the way you touch a railing when you're still learning how to walk after a long illness. The framed photo from our first apartment where the paint peeled no matter how many coats we begged it to hold. The scuffed floorboard he used to trip over and then salute, as if the house and he were in on a joke I would never understand. The mirror where I had stood 2 nights ago and not recognized the woman staring back. I looked again. For the first time in weeks, I didn't look like a crime scene. I looked like aftermath, with sirens quieting and someone starting to sweep. The afternoon stretched, elastic and forgiving. I made a simple lunch and ate it without bargaining with guilt. I replied to 2 messages from friends with more than a single word. I placed the orange mug near the sink as if setting it down beside me in the story. And when my phone buzzed again, another message from my mother, this one clipped and colder, I turned the device face down and let the room remain mine. Later, as the light bent low and gold over the messy garden, I sat at the table and wrote 3 sentences on a sticky note. Not resolutions. Not vows. Just lines that felt true enough to hold. He chose me, in life and in writing. I get to choose me, too. No is a complete sentence. I stuck the note to the folder. It felt less like armor and more like a passport. People think a will is about money, about things. They're wrong. A will is a map of love, a record of what someone wanted to stay true when they no longer could argue with the living. My mother's whisper at the funeral had sounded like fate. The will sounded like correction. Night leaned in. I washed the orange mug and left it to dry, a small, ridiculous flag planted on the side of the life I was re-entering. Then I did what I hadn't done since the accident. I turned off the downstairs lights, climbed the stairs, and lay down in our bed. The sheets were cool. The pillow still had the shape of the person I had been when I believed I didn't deserve gentleness. I laid the letter under my pillow like a talisman and closed my eyes. Grief still breathed in the room. It would for a long time. But something else breathed there now, too. Something that sounded like a promise kept. I didn't sleep immediately. I watched the ceiling, listened to the house settle, felt my heart keep time with the memory of machines that had once flatlined and now, stubbornly, beat. When I finally drifted, the last clear thought I had was this. Her whisper had been wrong. And I had the proof. I woke to darkness and the sound of rain beginning, soft at first, then steadier, tapping the windows like someone asking for permission to enter. I sat up and reached for my phone. I typed a message to my mother, then deleted it. Typed another. Deleted that, too. For once, silence was not surrender. It was choice. But I knew silence wouldn't be enough. People like her interpret quiet as vacancy, and they move in with their furniture of control and call it rearrangement. There would be a conversation. There would be a boundary. There would be a door that closed and stayed closed. I turned the letter over, ran my fingers over his name at the bottom, and felt the steadiness return to me like tide finding shore. Tomorrow, I would call her. Tomorrow, I would say the words I had never been allowed to say without punishment. Tonight, I let the will be the only voice in the room. And that was the turning. I had avoided her calls for days. Each message she left was shorter, sharper. First, it was, "We need to talk." Then, "You're being unreasonable." Finally, the last voicemail was just silence, a breath on the line, like she wanted me to hear her disappointment without words. But avoidance can only last so long. Some confrontations don't wait for you to choose them, they come pounding at your door. Mine came on a gray afternoon when the air felt heavy, like the sky itself was bracing for something. She showed up unannounced. I opened the door and there she was, my mother, perfectly pressed blouse, lips painted like a weapon. She didn't say hello. She pushed past me into the house, her heels clicking against the wood floor like gavel strikes. "We need to settle this nonsense," she announced, standing in the living room as if it still belonged to her authority. For a moment, I just stared at her. The old reflexes tugged at me, stand straighter, apologize, shrink. But the folder on the kitchen table was a weight in the room. His words, notarized and final, pressed against my ribs. "This isn't nonsense," I said quietly. She turned, eyes narrowing. "He poisoned you against me. That will, those words, none of it was fair. You've always been too easy to manipulate." I almost laughed, but it came out bitter, cracked. "Manipulate? You've been manipulating me my whole life." Her mouth twitched. "Don't exaggerate." I stepped closer. My hands shook, but my voice didn't. "Do you remember my 8th birthday? When you threw away the cake I made because it was crooked? Do you remember my wedding day, when the only thing you said to me was that my dress was too tight? Do you remember standing over his coffin and whispering, 'It should have been you'?" The room went quiet. Her lips pressed together, but she didn't deny it. That silence was confession enough. Finally, she said, "I only ever told you the truth. Someone had to. You were never strong enough to hear it." My chest tightened, but this time it wasn't from shame. It was from fury I had spent years swallowing. "No. Someone had to make me small enough so you could feel big. That's all you ever wanted. Control." Her voice rose, sharp and venomous. "If I didn't control you, you would have destroyed yourself long ago. You've always been weak. Ungrateful. Pathetic." Her words should have gutted me. They always had before. But something in me had shifted. His will, his letter, they had planted a spine where she had carved holes. I shook my head slowly. "No. I am not weak. I loved a man who loved me back. And he saw you for what you are. He left proof of it in writing." Her face flushed. "That will is a farce. He was blinded by you. I was his family too. And he chose not to leave you a single thing." My voice cut through hers like glass. "Do you know why? Because he knew how you treated me. He saw the way you chipped at me until I doubted my own worth. He wrote it down so I would never forget that it wasn't me. It was you." Her jaw trembled for a fraction of a second, so fast I might have missed it if I hadn't been watching. But she caught herself, straightened her spine, and sneered. "You'll regret this. When you're alone, when the money runs out, when no one wants you, don't come crying to me." I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "That's the difference between us, Mom. I don't need you anymore." For the first time, she looked smaller. Not physically, but in her presence. The shadow she had cast over my life began to shrink, inch by inch, until I could see her clearly for what she was, a bitter woman who had mistaken cruelty for strength. I walked to the door, opened it wide. The rain outside had started, soft at first, then harder, like the sky was applauding the end of something. You can leave now, I said. Her eyes flashed. If you shut me out, you'll regret it for the rest of your life. I held her gaze. No. If I let you stay, I'll regret it for the rest of mine. The silence stretched. Her face hardened into marble. She stepped past me, her perfume trailing like smoke, and out into the rain. I closed the door behind her, leaning my forehead against the wood, shaking. Not from fear, but from release. Years of words I had swallowed had finally been spoken. Years of control had finally cracked. For the first time in my life, the house felt like mine. The air didn't smell like her judgment anymore. It smelled like rain and possibility. I walked back to the kitchen, sat at the table, and looked at his letter again. My hand brushed over the underlined word, live. And in that moment, I realized something. I thought I had lost everything. But maybe, just maybe, I was finally free. Grief doesn't vanish. It doesn't pack its bags one morning and leave you with sunshine and silence. It lingers. It weaves itself into your skin, a scar that aches when the weather changes. But over time, the ache softens. It becomes less of a wound and more of a reminder. That's where I found myself in the months after the confrontation with my mother. Standing in the middle of absence, learning how to breathe in it. The house no longer felt like a tomb. It felt like something new was being built, slowly, quietly, in the cracks of every day. I started small. A notebook on the kitchen counter. Every morning, I'd write one memory of him, not the big ones, not the anniversaries or the vacations, but the tiny, ridiculous ones. Like the time he tried to fix the leaky faucet and flooded the kitchen. The way he insisted popcorn tasted better burnt. The night he sang off-key to me in the car because the radio broke. I wrote them down, one by one, until the pages filled. At first, it hurt. Each sentence was a blade. But then, it became something else. A garden. A place where he could still live. I also started letting people back in. A neighbor invited me for tea. Normally, I would have made an excuse, but that day, I said yes. We sat on her porch, sipping chamomile, and for the first time in months, I laughed. Not a forced laugh. Not the brittle laugh I'd used at the funeral. A real one. Later, I reconnected with a friend I'd pushed away. She hugged me tight and whispered, "I was waiting for you." And in that hug, I realized grief had made me retreat, but love was still waiting at the edges. At night, when the silence pressed too hard, I'd pull out his letter. The creases were worn from my hands, the ink smudged from tears. I'd trace the underlined word, live. That single word became a compass. So I began living in ways that scared me. I signed up for a pottery class even though I had no coordination. I took long walks without my phone, just listening to the rhythm of my feet. I cooked recipes he used to laugh at because they were too complicated. I burned half of them, but the other half tasted like victory. One day, I walked into the backyard and saw it, the crooked birdhouse. It still hadn't attracted a single bird. But instead of seeing failure, I saw persistence. It was still standing, tilted but unbroken, weathering storms with stubborn pride. I touched the rough wood and whispered, "We're the same, you and I." My mother tried to call again. Messages that ranged from cold to desperate. But this time, I didn't feel the old tug in my chest. The will, his words, had built a wall she couldn't climb anymore. No as a complete sentence, I whispered to myself each time her name flashed on the screen. And for the first time, I believed it. Healing didn't come in a single wave. It came in ripples. The first night I slept without crying. The first time I cooked dinner and didn't set a place for him. The first morning I opened the curtains and didn't flinch at the light. Each tiny step was a resurrection. One evening, I sat on the porch with my notebook, writing down another memory. I wrote, "He always said coffee tasted better in the orange mug, even when it dribbled onto the saucer." I paused, pen hovering. For the first time, the memory didn't hollow me out. It warmed me. Like sunlight through stained glass, still colored by loss, but beautiful. I closed the notebook and looked up at the sky. The stars blinked softly, indifferent and eternal. And I whispered, "I'm still here. I'm living." Just like you asked. If you've ever lost someone, you know this truth: love doesn't die. It changes form. It moves into the spaces between your breaths, into the choices you make, into the way you carry yourself when you thought you couldn't stand. His love had outlasted him. And now, it was outlasting my grief. Months later, I found myself at another funeral, someone else's. And as I stood there, listening to the eulogies, I thought about my own. Not in a morbid way, but in a curious way. What would they say about me when my time came? I realized I didn't want my story to end in bitterness, defined by my mother's cruelty. I wanted it to end in defiance, in survival, in choosing life even when death tried to chain me. And I knew then, I was rewriting the ending already. That night, before bed, I placed his letter back under my pillow. My hand lingered on it, my eyes wet but not with despair. With gratitude. At my husband's funeral, my mother whispered that it should have been me. But my husband's last words whispered something louder, something truer. Live. And I am.